Look, I'm going to tell you about the single most career-ending moment of my entire military service, and it wasn't enemy fire. It wasn't a failed mission. It wasn't even insubordination. It was 3 seconds on a beach in Qatar that damn near destroyed everything I'd worked for over 8 years in the Army. 3 seconds. That's all it took for my commanding officer to decide I was some kind of predator, for my reputation to get dragged through the mud, and for me to learn that sometimes the truth doesn't matter half as much as appearances. My name's Tyler. I'm 32 years old. Been a staff sergeant in the Army for the last 4 years, deployed twice to Iraq and once to Afghanistan before this mess happened. And I'm telling you this story because somebody needs to hear that you can do everything right and still get absolutely demolished by circumstance and bad timing. If you've ever been falsely accused of something you didn't do, hit that like button right now because you'll understand exactly where this is going. I was stationed at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, 6 months into a 9-month deployment doing logistics coordination for supply convoys running through the region. Not the most glamorous work, not kicking down doors or anything you'd see in a movie, just making sure our people had what they needed when they needed it. My commanding officer was Major Lisa Hernandez, 38 years old, career Army, tough as nails, ran our unit with precision that would make a Swiss watchmaker jealous. She was fair, demanding, and someone I genuinely respected. Never once did I look at her as anything other than my superior officer. That's important to understand. In 8 years of military service, I'd never once had even a whisper of inappropriate conduct, never been written up for harassment, never made anyone uncomfortable. I kept my head down, did my job, treated everyone with respect regardless of rank or gender. I wasn't some barracks creep or someone who couldn't maintain professional boundaries. I was a soldier who took his responsibilities seriously. The base had a small recreational beach area on the western perimeter where off-duty personnel could decompress, maybe catch some sun, pretend for an hour or two they weren't stuck in the desert managing military logistics. I'd been there maybe 4 or 5 times over 6 months. Usually just to clear my head after a rough week, sit in the sand with a book and some water, nothing crazy. It was late July, temperature pushing 115 degrees, and I'd gotten word that morning that a close friend from basic training had been killed in a training accident stateside. Drill Sergeant Rodriguez, the man who'd literally saved my life during my first deployment by teaching me situational awareness that helped me spot an IED before we rolled over it. Dead at 43 because some equipment malfunctioned during a routine exercise. I was processing grief, anger, that hollow feeling you get when someone who seemed invincible just stops existing. My supervisor had given me the afternoon off after seeing my face when I got the news. Take some time, Henderson. Go to the beach, go to the gym. Just get your head right. So that's what I did. I grabbed my backpack with a towel, a book I'd been reading about the Vietnam War, a bottle of water, and my sunglasses, then headed out to the beach around 1400 hours. The area was pretty empty, maybe a dozen people scattered across 100 yards of coastline. Everyone maintaining that respectful distance military folks tend to keep even during recreation. I found a spot about 50 yards from the nearest group, spread out my towel, and tried to read. Couldn't focus worth a damn. The words kept blurring together as I thought about Rodriguez, about all the close calls we'd survived just for him to die in some bullshit accident in Texas. I stood up after maybe 20 minutes, needed to move, needed to do something other than sit there drowning in my own thoughts. Decided I'd walk down to the water, maybe wade in up to my knees, cool off physically even if I couldn't cool off mentally. That's when everything went sideways. I was walking along the shoreline, eyes mostly on my feet watching where I stepped, because that beach had rocks and coral fragments that would shred your feet if you weren't careful, when I looked up and saw someone walking toward me from maybe 30 yards away. Took my brain about 2 seconds to register what I was seeing, and another second to realize I'd just made the worst accidental eye contact of my entire life. Major Hernandez was walking out of the water wearing just a bikini bottom, no top, completely topless. And in that split second when I looked up, our eyes met. I watched her expression change from relaxed to surprised to absolutely furious in the span of maybe half a heartbeat. I immediately looked away, turned a full 180 degrees, and started walking back toward my towel, heart hammering in my chest like I'd just sprinted a mile in full gear. My brain was screaming at me that I'd just committed career suicide over something completely unintentional, that there was no way this was going to end well, that I needed to get the hell off that beach and probably start packing my things. I didn't run. Running would have looked guilty, would have made it seem like I'd been caught doing something I knew was wrong. I walked with purpose back to where I'd set up, grabbed my towel and backpack without even bothering to shake the sand off, and headed straight back toward the barracks. My mind was racing through every possible scenario, every way this could get reported, every regulation that could be twisted to make me look like I'd been deliberately trying to catch a glimpse of my commanding officer in a state of undress. The fact that we'd been walking toward each other, that looking up was a completely normal thing to do when you're walking on a beach, that she'd been the one without proper coverage in a shared recreational area, none of that mattered. What mattered was that I was an enlisted man and she was a field-grade officer, that there's an inherent power dynamic that meant her version of events would carry more weight than mine, that one accusation from her could end not just my deployment, but my entire military career. If you're watching this and you've ever felt that sinking feeling when you realize you're about to get blamed for something that wasn't your fault, subscribe to this channel because you know exactly what I'm talking about. Drop a comment about your experience because I guarantee I'll read it and you're not alone in this. I got back to my quarters around 1500 hours, took a cold shower that felt like ice water on my overheated skin and overheated brain, and tried to figure out my next move. Should I report what happened first, get ahead of whatever complaint might be coming? Would that make me look guilty, like I was trying to control the narrative? Should I just wait and see if anything came of it? Hope that maybe she'd recognize it was completely accidental and let it go? I decided to wait. Maybe she'd be reasonable. Maybe she'd realize that we'd both been on a public beach and that I hadn't done anything wrong. I tried to convince myself that this would blow over, that she was professional enough to recognize an awkward accident for what it was. I should have known better. I should have gone straight to my chain of command and documented exactly what happened the moment it happened. But I didn't. I gave her the benefit of the doubt, assumed she'd be fair, assumed that 8 years of spotless service would count for something. The hammer dropped the next morning at 0730 during formation. First, Sergeant Palmer called me into his office right after morning briefing, face like carved granite, told me to stand at attention and shut the door behind me. Henderson, Major Hernandez filed a formal complaint yesterday afternoon alleging that you engaged in inappropriate conduct at the recreational beach area. She states that you deliberately positioned yourself to observe her while she was changing, and that when she confronted you with your eyes, you fled the scene. This is being treated as a potential violation of Article 93 and Article 134 of the UCMJ. You're being placed on administrative duty pending investigation. You're restricted to base, you'll report directly to me for all assignments, and you're to have absolutely no contact with Major Hernandez outside of required military functions. Do you understand? I stood there feeling like I'd been gut shot, like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Her version wasn't just wrong. It was deliberately distorted to make me sound like some kind of predator who'd been stalking her. I wanted to scream, wanted to punch a wall, wanted to explain exactly what had actually happened, but I knew better than to lose my composure in front of First Sergeant Palmer. First Sergeant, with respect, that's not what happened at all. I was walking along the waterline coming back from cooling off in the water. She was walking toward me from the opposite direction. I looked up to watch where I was going and accidentally saw her. I immediately looked away and returned to my area to give her privacy. I didn't position myself anywhere. I didn't flee. I walked away to be respectful. This was a complete accident. Palmer's expression didn't change. That's what you'll tell the investigating officer when they interview you. For now, you're on administrative duty and restricted movement. Dismissed. I saluted, turned, and walked out of that office knowing my career was hanging by a thread over something I had absolutely zero control over. The base isn't that big. Word spreads fast when an NCO gets called in for a complaint involving a field-grade officer. By lunchtime, everyone in my unit knew some version of the story, and none of those versions made me sound innocent. I could feel the looks, hear the whispers, sense people creating distance between themselves and me like whatever I'd been accused of might be contagious. The investigation took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of administrative duty filing paperwork and organizing supply closets while my reputation got shredded behind my back. 3 weeks of giving my statement to a captain from JAG who looked at me like I was already guilty, who asked me questions designed to make me sound like I'd been deliberately trying to see Major Hernandez in various states of undress. Had you ever noticed what she wore to the beach before? No, I'd literally never seen her there in 6 months. Did you know she sometimes sunbathed topless in that area? How the hell would I know that? I avoided that area specifically because officers used it. Why didn't you report the incident immediately? Because I didn't think I'd done anything wrong, and I assumed she'd be professional enough to recognize it was an accident. Every answer I gave seemed to get twisted into evidence of consciousness of guilt. Like the fact that I'd walked away somehow proved I knew I'd been doing something inappropriate. They interviewed other people who'd been on the beach that day. Most of them didn't remember seeing anything because they'd been doing their own thing, maintaining that respectful distance. 2 people corroborated that they'd seen me walking along the waterline alone before heading back inland toward my towel. Nobody saw me positioning myself for anything. Nobody saw me fleeing. But Major Hernandez's statement carried weight because she was a field-grade officer with 12 years of service and a spotless record, and I was just some staff sergeant who couldn't prove I hadn't been looking at her deliberately. The investigating officer's report came back unsubstantiated but concerning, which is military speak for, we can't prove he did it, but we don't entirely believe his story either. I didn't get court-martialed, didn't get an Article 15, didn't get formally punished. Instead, I got a documented counseling statement in my permanent file noting the complaint and the investigation got quietly reassigned to a different unit on base, away from Major Hernandez for the remainder of the deployment, and got told by my command that I should seriously consider whether continuing Army service is the right choice given recent events. That last part gutted me worse than anything else. 8 years of service, 2 combat deployments, multiple commendations, spotless record, and now I was being pushed toward the door because of 3 seconds on a beach where I'd literally done nothing wrong except look up while walking. The implicit message was clear. Even though they couldn't prove misconduct, the complaint itself was enough to make me damaged goods. Someone command didn't want to deal with. Someone who'd become a liability regardless of actual guilt. I spent the last 2 months of that deployment counting days until I could get stateside and seriously evaluate whether staying in was worth it. Every interaction with superiors felt loaded with judgment. Every assignment felt like they were waiting for me to screw up again to justify their decision to push me out. The camaraderie I'd built with my unit over 6 months evaporated like water on hot pavement. I went from being a respected NCO to being that guy with the complaint, the one people avoided being alone with because who knows what he might do or what he might get accused of next. If this story is pissing you off like it should, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happened next is going to make you even angrier. I need you to share this too because this kind of thing happens to service members all the time and nobody talks about it. I got back to Fort Hood in October, took 30 days of leave I'd accumulated, and spent most of it sitting in my apartment staring at walls trying to figure out who I was now that the one thing I'd defined myself by, my military service, had been poisoned by false accusations and institutional cowardice. My family asked what was wrong. I couldn't tell them. How do you explain to your parents that their son, who'd survived combat tours and been decorated for his service, was being driven out of the Army because his commanding officer decided an accidental glimpse on a beach was worth destroying his career over? How do you explain that the truth doesn't matter when institutional politics and power dynamics are in play? I started seeing a VA therapist in November, not because of PTSD from deployment, but because of what my own chain of command had done to me stateside. She was the first person who actually listened to my version of events without immediately questioning whether I was minimizing my own behavior or lying to protect myself. Tyler, what happened to you is a form of institutional betrayal, she told me during our 3rd session. You trusted the system to be fair, to recognize the difference between an accident and misconduct, to protect soldiers who follow the rules and maintain professional standards. Instead, the system chose the path of least resistance, which was sacrificing you to avoid any appearance of not taking complaints seriously. It's not right, it's not fair, and it's not your fault. Those words helped more than anything else anyone had said in months. It wasn't my fault. I hadn't done anything wrong. The system had failed me, not the other way around. I submitted my paperwork to not re-enlist in December. My first sergeant tried to convince me to stay, said I was throwing away a promising career over one incident. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "With respect, First Sergeant, you and everyone else in my chain of command already threw away my career when you chose to believe I was guilty of something despite zero evidence. I'm just making it official. I got out in March of the following year. Honorable discharge, terminal leave covering most of my last month. No ceremony, no fanfare, just processing paperwork and turning in equipment like any other Tuesday. 8 years of my life reduced to a DD 214 and a folder full of documentation about an incident that never should have destroyed anything but did anyway. I moved back to my hometown in Oklahoma, took a job doing logistics for a civilian shipping company because at least my military experience was good for something, and tried to rebuild a life that felt like it had been taken from me over nothing. The anger stuck around for a long time. Anger at Major Hernandez for filing a complaint she had to know was exaggerated at best. Anger at my chain of command for not having the spine to recognize the situation for what it was. Anger at a system that's so terrified of appearing soft on harassment that it'll destroy innocent people just to demonstrate it takes complaints seriously. But here's what I've learned in the 2 years since I got out, and this is the only part of this story that might actually help someone else going through something similar. The system isn't designed to find truth. It's designed to minimize liability and manage appearances. When you're dealing with any kind of complaint in a hierarchical organization, especially one with the power dynamics of the military, actual facts matter less than the optics of being seen to take the complaint seriously. Major Hernandez was never going to be questioned too hard about her version of events, because doing so would risk the organization looking like it didn't believe female officers when they reported concerns. I was never going to get a fair shake because I was lower ranking and male, which meant I was always going to be treated as the more likely perpetrator regardless of circumstances. That's not conspiracy theory. That's just how institutions protect themselves from controversy. The second thing I learned is that you can't control other people's perceptions or decisions, but you can control whether you let those things define you going forward. For about a year after getting out, I was bitter, angry, stuck in this loop of replaying that day and thinking about all the ways it should have gone differently. Should have reported it first. Should have demanded witnesses. Should have refused to leave the beach so there'd be other people who could corroborate my version. Should have fought harder during the investigation. Should have. But none of that changes what actually happened. What changes is deciding that one false accusation doesn't erase 8 years of honorable service, doesn't make me a bad person, doesn't mean I deserved what happened. I'm not going to let someone else's lies or institutional cowardice define the rest of my life. Third lesson, and maybe the most important, document everything. Trust no one in positions of power to do the right thing just because it's right, and never assume that doing everything correctly will protect you from bad outcomes. I did everything right on that beach. I looked away immediately. I left to give privacy. I didn't make a scene. Didn't matter. Should have taken photos of the beach layout showing the approach angles. Should have written down names of everyone present immediately. Should have sent myself an email documenting exactly what happened the moment I got back to quarters. When you're dealing with any kind of potential complaint, CYA isn't paranoia, it's survival. The people who survive these situations are the ones who assume the worst and prepare accordingly, not the ones who trust that truth and professionalism will be enough. I don't regret my military service. I met good people, learned valuable skills, served my country in ways I'm proud of. But I do regret trusting that the institution would treat me fairly when things got complicated. I regret giving Major Hernandez the benefit of the doubt instead of immediately protecting myself with documentation and witnesses. I regret not fighting harder during the investigation to demand actual evidence of misconduct instead of just accepting that the complaint itself was proof enough. Those regrets are mine to carry. Lessons bought with my career and reputation. If you're in the military or any hierarchical organization and you find yourself in a similar situation, learn from my mistakes. Document immediately. Report first even if you did nothing wrong. Get witnesses, get legal advice before saying anything to investigators, and don't trust that doing the right thing will be enough to protect you. The system protects itself first, and individuals are expendable when it comes to managing institutional risk. I'm doing okay now. Got a decent job, got my own apartment, dating someone who doesn't care about my military service or lack thereof. Some days I miss it, the structure and purpose and camaraderie of military life. Most days I'm just grateful to be out from under a system that was willing to destroy me to cover its own ass over a false accusation. If you made it this far in this story, I appreciate you listening. I needed to tell it, needed to get it out there that this kind of thing happens more than people realize. that false accusations can destroy careers and lives just as thoroughly as actual misconduct, and that sometimes the only justice you get is knowing you told the truth even when nobody wanted to hear it. If this story resonated with you at all, if you've been through something similar, or you understand how broken these systems can be, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment about your experience. Share this video because these stories need to be heard. And most importantly, if you're going through something like this right now, document everything, get legal help, and know that you're not alone. Thanks for watching. Stay strong out there.